I'll do 2 just for safety. Right. Nice to meet you finally, Peter. We're starting again from the start. So, obviously, being a racing driver, one of the many things you know when you're a kid and you want to be a racing driver is that you can't just flunk school and become a racing driver. You need to focus in physics, you need to focus in maths because it's a very technical sport still.
Mm-hmm.
So racing is just really about strategy as much as it's about skill. So how do you adapt your approach to stay ahead during the race?
So you're right, in endurance races, there's a lot of strategy involved in it. And we go into the race normally with a set plan, but then a number of contingencies on it. So in our championship, you can't do you have two compulsory pit stops in a 2-hour race, but you can't take one of those pit stops before 20 minutes. So if a safety car comes out before 20 minutes, there's not much benefit in stopping. But as soon as that 20 minutes goes and if there's a safety car, then immediately you'll come in and take one of those pit stops, because we only actually need one pit stop technically during the race, but from a series point of view, you need 2. So that's the first change in the strategy. Normally, my goal is to get as much of a lead as possible for Marcus, because in the pro-am racing that we do, it's really the amateur that makes the time, not the pro. And that's fundamentally because all the pro drivers are pretty much the same. From a time point of view, there'll be a tenth or 2 in it, but there's a big spread in the AMs. So my job is to be the fastest AM out there, and that drives our strategy. So if I've done a good job and we haven't got a safety car in the first hour, then that gives Marcus a pretty easy run. But if it changes, so let's say there's a safety car that comes out and I lose that lead, then that'll change our strategy. So that probably means that I'll have a slightly shorter stop and we'll put Marcus in the car more. But we're always thinking about what's happening from our competitors' point of view, what our plan is, and there's a lot of communication back and forth with the race engineer during the stint to decide how we do it. And of course, weather changes that as well.
Yeah. Of course, like you said then as well, weather and different things, and obviously you have to have trust in your car. So as you've seen recently with like Max Verstappen being a world championship winning driver, even when he can't trust the car, he ends up qualifying 6th in the Monaco Grand Prix. So how do you gain trust in your car? How do you build that balance of performance and safety?
Yeah, I think you got to start with a car it's capable, as your starting point. Because if you've got a car that's not set up well, or it's not built well, then you're never going to build trust in it. But if you've got that as your base, then it comes down to the driver, and that's one of the challenges with amateur drivers, is that we just don't. Amateur doesn't mean that we're less professional than any professional drivers. It basically means we've got a day job and we don't spend every day in the car, whereas a professional driver does. So for us, it's about making sure we have the confidence to push the car to the limit in tricky conditions. And that's where someone like Max does. He has the confidence in doing that, and that's why he gets the maximum out of it. So for us, it's time in the car, having a car that's not super aggressive, I think helps as well. So, if it's quite an edgy car, then certainly in slippery conditions that can make you want to push less. So I think a lot of it is time in the car, having confidence in your abilities and in the car, and knowing the track and finding those limits. And the more you can practice that, the better, because you don't want to be learning in a race where the limits are.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you say that sometimes, the inevitable happens and you end up having to learn during the race. But yeah, with in terms of your competitors, so how do you strike the balance between competition and just the general sportsmanship between each other? Like, obviously, we see it a lot of the time, obviously, with Drive to Survive, really heightening the competition between the drivers and this rivalry that seems to be fictitious most of the time. Especially with, like, Prost and Senna as well. You saw it, how, like, they were shown to be deep rivals, but in fact, they were best buddies and, they always had the best relationship. So how do you strike that sort of balance between your rivals?
It's a really good question. I mean, when we're on the track, our sole goal is to win, but it's not win at any costs. GT racing is a non-contact sport, and unlike some other motor racing, which is a little bit of rubbing and pushing, we don't do that. So the first thing is about making sure there's no contact with the other cars. I mean, sometimes it happens in an accident, but it's not a deliberate point of view. So, you know, I think hard but fair is the motto, I guess, that we race on. But once you're off the circuit, then it's, you know, I think there's a lot of helping other teams, and, you know, ultimately we want everybody on the track to be enjoying it, and of course if people enjoy it, they come back and fill grids, and we have more competition. So I think that's the balance you need to strike.
So Team PB is currently leading the championship in P1.
Yeah.
What sort of pressure do you feel to maintain this to the end of the season so you guys can back the championship?
It's a funny one, actually, because normally I find I don't have to put any pressure on myself at all, but we really like to win the championship this year. We've come second before, we've won the class before, and I think we've got a really opportunity. So you do feel a little bit of pressure building up, but it's all in our control at the moment. You know, we've won the last 2 races. Last year we won all by 1 race. If we carry on doing that for the rest of the year, then mathematically we'll win the championship. So I try not to put too much pressure on it, and you take each race as it comes. But the closer you get to winning the championship, naturally all the team gets a little bit more tense, because it just takes one mechanical failure or one issue in the pit lane where you don't win the race that you know, affects the overall standings. So it's there, but we just try and manage them.
Yeah. So looking at the tyre compounds for the racing, so you're not allowed to use intermediate tyres, is that correct? So with F1, of course, when it starts to rain a little bit, they like stick the inters on, and then if it starts to dry out, the interslick becomes a tyre. And usually whenever it is wet enough to be full wet, it's red flagged. So when you don't have the option for intermediate tyres, how do you strike the strategic balance there between the wet and the slick on the race?
So it really depends on what tyre you started with and what the conditions are. So we started the race at Donington on slick tyres. You could see the dark clouds coming, and then it started raining. And in our tyre, if you've got some temperature in the slick tyre, you can survive in the wet for a little while. The 2 things that affect your grip is the loss of temperature, so the tyres get cold and they don't work as well, or if you get any standing water. Once you get standing water, the slick just doesn't move any water, so you end up aquaplaning, which is never a good thing. And actually it was getting worse and worse, and I was on the radio to an engineer going, look, it's not, you know, it's getting marginal now, and he came over and said, well, it's going to stop raining, can you hang on? And so you go, yes, that's fine, I'll hang on. And actually it stopped raining, you built the temperature back up in the tyres and you could stay out. If we'd come in for wets, those wets would have burnt out because it stopped raining, you know, 5 laps later, and we've had a pit stop. So sometimes it's about survival. Other times it'll be the track. You're going out maybe in qualifying and the track's damp. Do you go on slick tyres or wet tyres? And often it's a call on, sometimes it's on a safety call. Actually, we'll just take the wet tyre knowing that it's going to perhaps not be as good as the dry, but you're, you know, more control, not likely to have an issue. So it's very much, and the thing about the UK often is it's not, you know, we often get 30-degree plus temperatures. So, you know, the track could be potentially look dry, but it's quite cold and it's a bit greasy, and it's those sort of conditions where something like an intermediate would be great, but we don't get that. So often it's just a judgment call about which tyre you want to put on, feel comfortable on, and the result often goes off the back of that.
Yeah, I mean, even the pros get it wrong. Looking back at Sochi 2021, Lando Norris sliding off the track.
Threw away a race really in the end. Should have come in, but you know, so you rely a lot on your team to help, because you can see so much. You can see spray hitting the windscreen. You can think it's raining a lot, but they can see much more. They can see weather radar. They can see what's happening across the circuit that maybe you can't. So it becomes very much a team call on that one.
Yeah, brilliant.